I don't think so.
Take a seat. We would be honored if you would join us.
Welcome, everybody. Star Wars After Party, episode 49. Getting close to 50. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but here we are. Here we are, virtual, making it happen. Discussing Acolyte Season 1, Episode 7, Choice. We can't wait to do it, so we're going to jump right in. For joining us for the first time, I'm Tyler Bodkins. I like to blow things up. I like to blow things up. With me, he does not center around his anxieties. He's Cameron Porter.
Dude, I love that line. That one hung on for a couple of seconds for me. But yep, it's me live from.
Where are you?
Kansas.
Kansas. Is that in the United
I'm in
States?
Kansas. Yeah,
it's a little strange, but okay. If you're listening in Kansas, congratulations. You're sharing territory with the great Cameron Porter. Yeah, so we're virtual tonight. Things might sound a little different, going to look a little different on YouTube. We're going to make it happen, though. We didn't want to miss Cameron 2 weeks in a row. That just would not be acceptable. So we're doing everything we can because this is the way.
Yes.
So, man, it was another wild episode. Let's jump right in. We're not going to, the only news I heard this week was kind of like, it was like news / not news in the sense that I saw that there is a job listing for, I guess, like a head animator or a head of production for a Lucasfilm animation project. So,
whoa,
maybe that's Tales of the Whatever, or it could be something like Visions or some Lego thing. Who knows? You don't really ever know. So that's floating out there, but I think we're ready to talk about the Acolyte. We have a ton of listener feedback that we will be getting into, but yeah, let's just kind of jump right into the episode, because I think everything that they spoke about, being that we ended up doing we all expected a time jump back to the 16 years on Bryndock, and that's what we got. So all the speculation from last week is still on the table. So yes, season 1 of the Acolyte, episode 7, Choice, directed by Koganada, written by Charmaine DeGrate, Jen Richards, and Jasmine Flournoy. Cameron, what are your opening thoughts?
Opening thoughts. I really enjoyed the way that they showed this episode from different perspectives. Like you said, we knew we were going to go back and see this, but on one hand, I didn't enjoy them re-showing things that were already shown, but on the other hand, I think it served its purpose to tie things together and line up with what we've already seen really well. I walked away from this episode satisfied to have, with the answers that we got for some of the stuff that happened in between. I like that they filled in the gaps for what happened with the fire and everything. And I love where they ended it off with leaving us to guess, or we kind of know where we're going now. The stage has been set. We know exactly what happened. We know the story. We know the narrative. So I think they did a good job of just setting us up. I'm even more anticipative of the next episode now.
Yeah, man. I'll say, for me, as soon as Kayla and I started watching, she said it first, and I immediately was like, yes. It was like the first 2 minutes, she was like, I already know I need a rewatch. It just kind of had that kind of energy in the sense of, I think that a lot like last week, there is probably a lot to be gleaned from a second look. We're recording this literally right after, so we've only seen it once, everyone. We're trying to get this out to you as quick as we can this week.
Mm-hmm.
And, I still feel pretty confident that we can talk about some things. besides taking some notes, it was like a story that we kind of knew what happened in the grand sense. We didn't know all the details. We got more details now, and it's an interesting way to tell a story, but it does feel, and we'll discuss this more as we get into the episode proper, but it does feel a bit like it ties into the theme of what this show is kind of all about, which is essentially just the idea of like, the truth depends greatly on your point of view. It's what Obi-Wan said in Empire. So I think it was Empire. But yeah, so I enjoy that. It is kind of interesting to almost get what feels like in some ways just a retelling of an episode we already got. But there's certainly plenty for us to get from this, and I think there's still a lot of speculating to do on how this tied up. I will say this, a lot of the stuff that we speculated early on, somebody check on Ben Gager, by the way, because the Jedi aren't looking too good here. But, it's both sides. We'll get into that. But one thing that we speculated at some point was like when that noise happened in episode 3, I remember we talked about like, was it the Jedi? Were they in there like spying on the Coven? And of course that's what it was. But we also had some speculation like, what if it's like like this Sith or the secret something, this third party that is manipulating everything happening here. And obviously that's not what we got.
Yeah.
It was almost just a good old fashioned misunderstanding. But I don't know. I kind of, in some ways, like was hoping that it would be something a little bit, I don't know, more sinister. I didn't want to think that it, as I joked about Giger, but as he called in, I was like, yeah, maybe it wasn't the Jedi. Maybe it was something pitting them against each other. And no, it kind of just seems like, Soul really let his thirst for what's good get in the way and actually end up causing quite a bit of evil. So it's interesting narrative. It's not what I expected. Yeah. Is it in line with what you it is in some ways in line what we speculated, but it's not exactly what I was, I guess, hoping for, if that makes sense. I don't know that I wanted it to just be the Jedi messed up and this giant terrible thing happened. So for you, how did you take it?
It was definitely not what I was anticipating. But looking back on it now, like I feel like we've seen this before in Star Wars, where things just happen to be really unfortunate misunderstandings, and it almost adds to the tragedy of it more.
Yeah.
Or no, not almost. It definitely does. Like it's not as cut and dry as you're not taking the kids. Yes, we are. Battle ensues.
Right.
It's just more tragic because we even get to hear Mother Aniseya say like, I was going to let her go with you. Like her dying words are like, here, let me explain it to you. So it didn't go how I expected it to, but like it checks out for Star Wars storytelling for me in my book.
Yeah, I think you're right on with that. So let's jump back to the very top. So we get, we're back on Bryndock. We get this like 16 years earlier thing, and we're in it now, not from the witch's perspective, because that's really what the first episode was. It was all from their perspective. Very little of it was shown from the Jedi perspective. Mm-hmm. This episode is the opposite. Very little is shown from, specifically the witch's perspective. A lot of it is through the Jedi. The first episode we're talking about here, season 1, episode 3, called Destiny. This one called Choice, which I speculated, and I guarantee you it was not on air, that's what this episode title will be, which I'm going to go ahead and speculate.
That's cool.
Speculate on air. Next week's episode will be called Atonement Sacrifice. That's going to be my speculation. Atonement Sacrifice.
All right, that's bold.
We'll see. Or maybe it'll, or maybe actually more something like Atonement Judgment. We'll see. But I'm getting some atonement vibes. I feel like Soul has to atone for his sins to be judged or something like that. There just seems like something like that happening. But anyway, so we get it from the Jedi perspective, and we find that they've been on this planet for 7 weeks, and that there was a callback to the High Republic. Did you catch that? Where they mentioned the hyperspace disaster. So that was essentially the culminating act of Phase 1 for those who aren't reading the High Republic books. And it's been a couple years since I've read them myself. But Cameron, fill in where I'm messing up here. But essentially, there was this group called the Nihil or the Nile, and they orchestrated this event where essentially ships were being like sucked out of hyperspace, and it just wreaked havoc in all kinds of places. And this is one of those planets, and we're finding out that there shouldn't be life here, but there is. And Cameron, what's the reason for all of this life that now seems to be teeming on Brindok?
This I'm drawing a blank.
Well, I
can't remember.
They explained that there was a vergence in the Force, and so we've got this vergence that's happening, which is something that Qui-Gon Jinn talked about in Episode 1, and so I guess this vergence in the Force, it created not only May and Osha. Now that's what we're I suppose supposed to take. But just life on the planet in general, like apparently the whole planet should have no life, like no vegetation, no animals, no nothing, but it's teeming. So some kind of vergence has occurred, and we don't know why that is. I don't know. We still don't know that. That seems to be another mystery, unless I've missed something.
Interesting.
For some reason that's happened.
Yeah. So you're saying that we should take we can take the birth of May and Osha as maybe just chance, that while the mothers are trying to create them through the Force, it just so happens that because of this vergence, the two things kind of lined up simultaneously.
I don't know. It's very difficult for me to understand, because I was kind of under the impression, and this is going to kind of like maybe in some way nullify what I just said or contradict it at the very least, but I was under the impression that they had just moved to that planet. I didn't think that they had been there that whole time. I don't know why. I'll have to go back and watch the 3rd episode, but I wasn't under the impression that the girls were created there. But now it does seem like I won't say it's a coincidence. If I were to try to explain it, and there may be some dialogue that I'm missing, but I would think of it more like they wanted to, or were going to create May and Osha, so they found this place where there was a vergence in the Force, and they went there to do it. Oh. That would be the way that I would think they're setting it up, but I'll admit that it's still a little bit of a question mark. So I see that perspective. I think in my brain, I'm thinking they've been there for a while. They have decided themselves, hey, we're going to try and, do this immaculate conception. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens that because of the vergence in the Force, it allows it to come to be. Could be. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what kind of answers. I'm not sure. Get. Yeah. It does seem, though, that that the Jedi were not going to like whatever the answer was in terms of how did you make. They straight up ask in this episode. I can't remember if they did in the 3rd episode or not. Yeah. But no, they didn't. Yeah. So they straight up ask in this one, and Mother Coral's like, "Yo, we ain't telling you that." So it does seem to imply, if not some sort of dark side, whatever, perhaps even Sith involvement. I don't know, man. And they're called a Force cult, by the way. And Torben they knew about Night Sisters, but I think that
but not these.
Soul kind of knew that this was something a little bit different. Let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit. You mentioned it being a misunderstanding, and this is kind of random. You ever listen to a band called Flight of the Conchords, like a comedy duo?
Yeah,
They have this,
yeah, I've
they
heard
have
of
this
them.
one song on it's like an HBO special. I think it's the only place it exists. It's called Jenny. And Brett plays this woman, Jenny, who sits down at the park next to this guy who Jermaine's playing. And the whole time, basically, Jermaine's like trying to pretend like he remembers who this woman is. And she's like, you know, we sat here a year ago, and he's like, yeah, and then we ate some sandwiches. We just put them in our mouths. And she's like, yeah, that's how you eat sandwiches. And they're going back and forth, and then it kind of gets to the end, and she's like, we had a child. And he's like, pardon? Like, and it goes back and forth, and she's like, yes, it was a very difficult process. We had to adopt it. How can you not remember Ted, or whatever his name was? And he goes, I'm Brian. And then they go, oh, what a hilarious misunderstanding. And that's what I thought of this entire episode.
Yeah.
Is what a hilarious misunderstanding. So it starts with, and fill in the blanks for me here, but it seems to start with Soul seeing the girls and kind of Mother Coral angrily snatching them back to take them back to the safety of the fortress. What were your thoughts during that scene? How did you take what was sort of being laid out, I guess, during that?
So you're talking about the scene of Manosha at the tree?
Yes. Whenever Soul is watching and Coral grabs them, and you can tell that's when Soul like immediately feels the first tinge of concern for the girls.
Yeah, I mean, throughout this episode, we get to see a more controlling and insecure side of her that really paints this picture that she is ultimately so afraid of losing them that she is willing to try to kind of shelter them in the space that they live in, where, you know, you're so afraid. It mimics very much, you know, how a lot of us grow up in religious households where, you know, parents are so afraid of the outside influence of things that rather than allow their children to, or as they grow up and no longer be children, but instead of allow them to see the world through a perspective that creates an open conversation, rather you just kind of box them out from those things to try and hold them close and protect them. And we saw this as we get into it way more into the episode, that side of her, but that really kind of sets that precedent of the tension that you see in the dynamic between her and Mother Aniseya, where you have this very, and honestly, and it kind of made me laugh because I was like, how on earth did the two of them exist in any kind of relational dynamic to be so much opposite of each other, to be so free thinking versus so like closed-minded or sheltering.
Yeah.
You see the balance, you see the tension between the two of them a lot throughout this episode and some of the other previous ones, but this one especially, to be completely on polar opposite ends of the spectrum. But yeah, that scene, when that opened up, it kind of set that precedent that like she is very suspicious of anything outside of their coven.
Right.
Therefore, she's got to protect her children and keep them like 100% indoctrinated in what they believe, so that they don't feel tempted to look for anything else.
Yeah. It's really interesting. You see this play out. I'll try to say it as succinctly and quickly as possible because it's through the entire episodes, through the entire series. One of the critiques that I had of Soul after the third episode was the fact that when Osha was doing her test, her training, or the test that they ran where they were on the ship,
Yeah.
and that Soul lied in order to get her to tell the truth. And I mentioned that you can't do that. Like, when I say you can't do that, let me be very clear. And this is a great this show is a great example of this principle. It very much ties into like a yin yang type theory. The idea that when you do something, it will manifest and come back around. You can't just, there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's always going to come back.
Yeah.
And so if you lie, if you do a dark thing, which that's what we're going to call a lie right here, it does not matter your intention. It does not matter how noble your thoughts may be. At some point, that lie is going to come out. And so you see Soul do that. And I commented then, not a good thing. Let's bring it back to this episode. Mother Coral angrily snatches her kids because she is worried for them. She wants to make sure that they are protected and that no one gets them. The way that scene is shot, when Coral came out of that tree, it came out from behind that tree, which is what Soul saw, I was like, yo, that it freaked me out a little bit. Like, she was very angry. She carried herself with a lot of dark energy, and she grabs the girls. And when she grabs the girls, she's doing it to protect them, but Soul saw it as though they were being abused. And that...
Or like kidnapped or held against their will.
One of those things, yes. And that misunderstanding ultimately set all of this up for what happened. And you see throughout the episode, there's all of these interactions where in order to do a good thing, someone would do a quote unquote bad thing. And it always came back around to create this ever escalating problem. So even it's really funny. Like one of the things that happened in the episode is Torben just wanted to go back to Coruscant, and it's like, well, guess what, buddy? You're going back to Coruscant at the end of the episode, and it's not going to be good because you went about it in a bad way. It's not how you want it. This idea, I think, that this show is having us wrestle with is, do the ends justify the means? And it seems like the answer that this show is painting, you can make the decision for yourself in, your everyday life, but it seems like the answer is no. It doesn't. That the way that it's like the means are the existence in which we are living. So if you're constantly doing bad things for a good cause, you're just out there spreading evil all the time. It's wild, but it's an interesting lesson.
Yeah, it's like the end may be what it is, but at the end of it, you are still left to live with the means in which you used.
Sure.
It's like war, for example, or World War II or whatever, the end may be peace or some sort, or eliminating a threat to basic human rights. But the people that fought for that at some point, and you hear about this all the time with people that suffer from PTSD and people that deal with a lot of things post-war and post-fighting, is that you still have to deal with the fact that you killed people or you committed, you did things that you still have to live with and wrestle with in your life. So, I think that's a great point.
So one of the next scenes we see, this is a new perspective off of a situation we'd already, seen play out some in the third episode, is Mother Aniseya, I'm using the word seduces Torben. She brings him to this space. And it seems like she was able to do that because he had such anxiety. There was such fear. He allowed fear to take fertile root in fertile ground. That's the Dave Filoni thing in Tales of the Empire that I love so much. But it seems like that's what got her in. Let's talk about that. What were your thoughts about just that whole scene, the way it was shot, the way it was animated? What were your thoughts?
It was definitely the first word that I thought of was seduced as well. It was very extremely playing on his emotions already, and she definitely was able to recognize who was the weakest of the bunch and lean into that as much as she could. The way that the voices echoed, because I watched the episode with my AirPods in, so I really got like a fully immersive experience as far as that scene goes, but the voice is kind of swirling around and feeling very seductive and very tempting. And I think the scene that like really hit home for me was when you see Torben, you see that one long tear going down Torben's face, and he's not crying or anything, but you can just see, you're going back and forth, and you can just almost feel that tension in him of wrestling with like, I know I shouldn't be leaning into this, but like it really is satisfying what I'm wanting right now, and just that inner turmoil kind of coming out, and that tear that's just like streaming down his face. And the way that scene sits so tense until he finally does open his mouth. She says, "Why don't you just ask me?" And then he says, he doesn't ask her anything. He just says, "I want to go back to Coruscant."
Right.
And it was like at that moment, it's like she had you.
Yeah. It's so strange that I'm trying to understand, like, I guess he was just bored. Is that what we're led to believe? Is that Torben was just a little bit bored? He just missed his buddies there at the temple. Like, well, I don't understand what was so.
I think he was angry. I think he was angry. I think he was he felt like he was missing out. He was on a stupid mission that, they'd been there for 7 weeks, no real development. And I think he probably, it's just that Padawan mentality. That's Anakin Skywalker. That's just impatience. That's, I need some action. I need something going on. I need to be furthering my training. And just being impatient with the process and missing the goal or the lesson in all of it, I think.
Yeah. Do you think now it makes sense what happened in the second episode where Torben literally like killed himself? Like, does it seem like, is it a stretch that he would feel that guilty over this situation, or does it track? What are your thoughts about that?
I think the fact that he put himself in that trance, because he says, later on in the episode when we have this other battle, just some of the first words out of his mouth were, "My mind is fortified," when he's worried that somebody's getting back in his head again. So you can tell just from that scene that he's already feeling really badly about how, maybe not even bad, but more so just embarrassed about how easily exploited he was. So when he said that, like knowing what he went through, knowing what happened because of it, I would imagine that the trance that he locked himself into with the Force was a means of him trying to make atone for being the weakest one out of the group. It's that like resilient nature of, I can't let this happen again. XYZ happened when this happened the last time. I can't let it happen to me again. So I think he spent so long being able to live with what he did because of how he responded to it. But then the second he was faced with being confronted by someone who was like being faced with the end result of what happened, of May being there, being so angry, it was like, it's like your guard just gets let down. You're like, no amount of trying to reconcile with my own mind can make up for the things that I did outside of myself and the repercussions that they had on other people's lives.
That's wild. It still feels like such a stretch to me. I had hoped that we would get better answers about that. I mean, I get it. He messed up pretty good, but he was also a Padawan. I would argue that Soul bears way more of the responsibility than Torben. So it just seems like it still feels.
And we may still get an opportunity to see more of Torben's story play out before he like locks himself into the Force.
You think there could be a flashback because we only have one more episode. I don't see it, man. I think we got all we're gonna get.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. Well,
I don't know. It just feels a little. We talked about it very briefly. When the third episode aired, it's like, man, a Jedi killing themselves. That's pretty wild. Like, there must be a really good reason. Not that there's ever a good reason. Just a little PSA there, but I don't know, man. It just felt. It's like, oh, you were bored and you wanted to go home. Cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just I'm not saying that it completely fell flat. It just didn't seem like the most convincing. I really expected that when we saw what kind of was going on with the mothers taking over the minds of these Jedi, that we would see something really, really crazy and really dark. It didn't really seem like that. Now, I will say this. I should probably keep in mind an entire coven of witches were killed. It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like 50 people and a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I can get it, but it still is just, what a weird, I just don't get the suicide thing, but
It didn't match up with the crime or his. You would think that if you spent that long locked into a force bubble, you would figure out how to understand the scenario with more depth, I guess.
Yeah. It's like, what?
To where he could come out of it and be like, no, I apologize for what I did and the things of it, but it's not worth my life. I don't know.
Now, I will say this. There does seem to be some kind of... All right, so in order to save the Jedi that were there, in order to save either arguably to save Kelnaka's life, because the three of them probably could have taken him down. In order to save the one life, she took the many lives, And so in that way, when she died in the first episode, which I'm finally accepting, like, I was always a little bit playing up the Dara could be some secret Sith master thing. It was always a little turned up. I don't know that I fully ever believed it, although it's possible. But that said, her dying seems now to make sense. She gave her life for the one person. Like, there was one person that was going to die. She gave her life to save the one person versus, potentially her saving herself and other people dying, kind of like what happened with Kelnaka. Like, all right, so that makes sense. I think I might have speculated this in the third episode, and you could still make the case for this by Torben killing himself. There is a world in which he is attempting to show May that that revenge will not solve anything. So in that way, it could be a noble death. Because, I mean, he might have been like
he fell on his own sword.
Right. To teach her a lesson, essentially. Because I guess, as we're talking it out, I mean, Torben was never going to kill May. He wasn't going to kill May. So, like, one of them presumably had to die. And so I guess in some way, and I'm air quoting this like crazy, he took the honorable way out, maybe in an effort. That's the only way I can rationalize it. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But again, if you're dealing with something like suicide, a very taboo sort of issue, like, it's tough to make it really make sense. I'm trying to follow what the show is laying out. But anyways, that's the best I've got. Cameron, any more thoughts on Torben killing himself, or would you like to change the subject as much as I would?
No, I think unfortunately, with there only, I think you're right. With there being one episode left, we may be left with more questions than answers as far as that situation goes.
Yeah. So the next thing that sort of pops off in the episode is Soul feels that Osha is meant to be his Padawan. What's that about? Feels very strange.
Yeah, I don't love that whole. I don't love that either. I don't think that's. It comes off as a little bit self-righteous.
Yes, very much so.
Or selfish in a way.
Yeah.
Or like savior mentality. Absolutely. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we know that he, quote unquote, has a passion for the underdog. Like, that was kind of in his character bio, and we've seen it play out throughout the series. But yeah, he was like, it was during this time I wrote the note, Soul is just judging like crazy. Like he really is like making a lot of really heavy judgments on other people. And he definitely seems like he thinks that he knows what's right. And, we see Indara tell him, Osha is too old. Like, these kids are too old. The Jedi Council will not take them. So you need to, like, take this, like, delusion and just get rid of it.
Yeah, I do. I think to our friend Gager's point, we do get a chance to kind of...
Let's not steal man Gager. Only straw man Gager. Because he's going to come on at some point, and we're going to have a court proceeding. I don't want any kind of this. All right, how about this? This is inadmissible in the court of law when we put the Jedi on trial, which is going to come sometime this summer. We got to do it. But all right, fine, go ahead.
Yeah, I will say that I appreciated the glimmer of hope in the Jedi. In that exchange between Soul and Indara, where you do have one Jedi like Soul who is representing that overstepping, heightened sense of responsibility or authority, and you have somebody pulling back like Indara saying, no, this is not our place to intervene and control the situation. We can extend our hand however we see fit, but at the end of the day, it's ultimately up to them. So that was a different direction that I thought things were going to go, to see that exchange, because we kind of see Soul, we've always talked about Soul being this like Qui-Gon-esque character, where we see him as just, wise beyond his years and such. But if we go back, he has that like immaturity in him as well. And to see Indara actually being the one, because, there's a lot of speculation about Indara's dark tendencies as well.
Right.
But her being the one that was actually trying to avoid all of this from happening.
Yeah.
So I like how they played that out. It was very, the show's kind of constantly changing, and you're kind of left questioning things a lot as far as we go through these different perspectives. So I like the exchange between the two of them.
Yeah, there was a quote I saw today that Lee Jung-jae was doing an interview recently, and he had mentioned that Qui-Gon was inspiration for how he approached Soul, which makes total sense. I mean, it definitely is coming through.
Checks out.
So,
yeah.
All right. So he tells he tells Indara once May leaves that he wants to try a different approach with the other child. And it's like, as he said that, I was like, oh, you mean you want to lie? And yeah, that's what he did. And we already have kind of seen how this played out. At this time, and this is going to get into some areas that I'm interested in, but I'm really drawing a bit of a blank in terms of what it all can mean. They mentioned that they've tested the blood, and the midichlorian levels are incredibly high.
Mm-hmm.
It could even be said that they are as high as Master Yoda's. The potential for them is up there. This also ties in with last week's episode where Kymir told Osha, "It's your power. Like you're the one that's so powerful." At least the potential for her to be powerful is there. They go on to say this dialogue. I think I got it word for word. I was writing in the dark, so bear with me. Their symbionts are the same. One consciousness in two bodies. What in the world does that mean? And they did say, because they were like, well, it's because they're twins. And they were like, nope. The symbionts wouldn't be exactly the same in twins. They must have come from one consciousness. Now, I spend a great deal of my time pretty interested in consciousness and what it's all about. But the truth is, nobody really knows. There's very little understood about the nature of consciousness. So the idea of one consciousness being split into two bodies, I'm trying to understand what that's about. Do you have any insight to what's being said here?
Yeah, I mean, if I think about one consciousness split between two bodies, the first thing that comes to mind are other High Republic characters, Tarek and Surik. These two twins during the High Republic era they share a consciousness, but they're two different beings. We don't, as far as I know, I haven't read any background story on them or how they came to be, but they are even referred to with they pronouns as well to identify the fact that they're kind of represented as both of them as one. Two people shared conscious. They feel each other's thoughts and feelings, and when one's in trouble, they can sense it. So I don't know if there's a connection there, but it's something that it didn't shock me as much because I'm familiar with those characters.
I did not even consider that, but great call. It's really interesting. There's even this idea sometimes of like with Anakin, I feel like I've heard certain people discuss that. Like there's Anakin and then there's Darth Vader. It's really two different people, and I don't know. I mean, you could say, no, it was always Anakin in there underneath, but it's a similar kind of thing. I think about the flashes during Ahsoka where he's like walking towards her when they're in the World Between Worlds, and like he would change into Vader and then flip back to Anakin. And it's an interesting idea. I mean, there's other examples of this happening, but it even just kind of makes me think about, the Jungian idea, Carl Jung, the psychotherapist, like the idea of the shadow self, the subconscious underneath the conscious. And I mean, I don't know. It's bringing up, conjuring images of that. There were certainly a lot of people that were speculating like a Fight Club-esque twist. And while that didn't make sense because of all of the times that we've seen them interact and we've seen other people, they were in two different places. This does kind of explain that sort of thing. It also might explain why during the times in which one sort of gained more power, the other sort of lost it. We speculated about how maybe this is another one of the like allegories that they're doing here, whereas in the prequels we see the dark side rise and the light side loses power. It's one thing, it's the Force, but it's in two bodies. It's in the Jedi and the Sith. So it all kind of feels a little bit like it's a metaphor for that in some way, but it's just wild. I didn't think of anything in my Star Wars vault, but you're right in Tarek and Saret. You guys can Wikipedia that. I'm sure that it seems like every week there's like one thing that ends up being talked about a lot from Wikipedia. This week maybe it'll be Tarek and Saret. A couple weeks ago it was cortosis. That was the thing. Everybody became a expert on cortosis overnight. It's like I vaguely remembered it from Knights of the Old Republic, but everyone else is they have their degree in cortosis, or what did you call it in the call-in? I forgot what you called it.
Cordonium or something.
Yeah, or I think that's how they refer to it. You know how like Morban used to be Korban, or maybe it's vice versa. It's kind of like that. Yeah. It used to be called Cordonium, but that was like the old way, and the new way is cortosis. That's Star Wars Afterparty canon.
Yeah, I mean, I've always played. I play very few video games, but I've played Skyrim since I was like 12. It's one of the few video games I still play, and there's a material that you can make armor out of in that game called corundum ore. So maybe I was just getting all my wires crossed with the core word.
That actually tracks and makes a lot of sense. All right, so there's two symbiotes and one consciousness, or sorry, their symbiotes are the same, one consciousness and two bodies. Guys, if y'all know what's going on there, please write into the show or call in. We have a lot of emails to get through today, which we will get through here in just a sec, because it's all the stuff's in play for next week. It's all an accident. It's all a misunderstanding. And it was interesting where Mother Aniseya looks at Soul and says, someday these noble intentions you have will destroy the entire Jedi Order. Man. And then it's not long after that, Soul murders. You can justify it if you like. Feel free. Soul murders Aniseya, and in her dying breath, she tells him, "I was gonna let her go with you. It's what she wanted." Man.
Yeah.
How did that feel, Cameron?
That is just one of those, like, you kind of just like face palm. You're like, really? Like, if you could have just waited like a couple of seconds, Soul, if you could have waited a couple of seconds for Mother Aniseya, if you would have said it sooner so that we could have avoided all of this, it would have made things a lot easier. My, I hate to say this, but I was too focused on my qualm with this scene to really like dive deep
Okay,
on
what's
it.
the qualm?
My qualm was the convenient lack of reaction from the other mother or all of the witches that were lined up with bows. Like when Soul stabbed Mother Aniseya, this is her wife that's standing here. This is all of the people that follow her as a leader to just freeze long enough for her to talk, and Soul talk back. I was just like, that took me out of it. Yeah, that took me out of it so hard right there in that moment. And I was like,
it's rather convenient.
I mean, I get why they did it. It was necessary to like extend the scene
Dramatic
or whatever.
and, yes,
but
I get what you're saying. I mean, I didn't pick up on that, but you're not wrong in taking it that way. We do see here.
Yeah.
We finally see the power of many, which. I have some thoughts about the power of one, the power of two, and the power of many, but I'm going to save it for next week because maybe we'll get a little bit more answers. But we do see the power of many. Presumably, whatever they were doing when they were turning into that mist and coming together, which I like the way they were just kind of like doing this like rocking thing or whatever. Like I liked the way they looked as they were in there, sort of like meditating. It was very interesting. Right before Indara killed them all, which. Presumably, she didn't mean to do. You got to imagine
that left me with a lot of questions. That whole like, I don't know. I was not satisfied with that sequence and it ending in that way. It seemed too sudden. It seemed too.
It was
anticlimactic. It's like, what did she do? Was she really just like? Got them out of Kelnaka's head and obviously like took that energy and pushed it back to them, but to be able to kill that many in one instant, there's definitely something more. There's something more going on with that.
We don't really know what it was. I mean, all right, let me spitball a theory real quick. Presumably, they were connecting themselves to Kelnaka via the Force, and when Indara cut them off from Kelnaka, that maybe it severed their connection to the Force, which is what ultimately led them to die. If you're cut off from it, you're dead, you're gone. I that's I don't know. It's an interpretation. I don't really know. It explains a lot though, because when we saw them all dead, whenever, they're leaving in the third episode, is like, how did that happen? Like, there was no big fight. There doesn't seem to have been a giant fight. It doesn't seem like it makes sense. It certainly wasn't on my bingo card. I didn't think that was what was going to happen. So it's interesting to me. But you're right. It was sudden and it was anticlimactic, but I guess it makes sense in some way.
Yeah, if I really think about it, if they have to reach out through the Force to put their life into another being, you could beg the question that, like, what if you were to get stuck, kind of floating around in the ether in between that being and yourself as a being, and something could, it could be a very fragile connection, a very dangerous thing to attempt to do.
Right.
So it made it really easy that once they got pushed out of Kelnaka, it just kind of like ended them all. Just I I don't know.
It's an interesting thing. It was a wild scene. Last scene we'll talk about. Sol is holding up May. He's holding up Osha. He lets May go in order to hold on to Osha.
Dude.
Which is terrible for sure. But I mean, it's also, again, it's another metaphor that's happening. He let go of the dark. He let it fall down, believed it to be dead and gone, and embraced and held on to the light. And that's been his story for the last 16 years. And now he has to face the shadow side of himself. He has to face his dark side, and he's going to do it with May. Again, the quote unquote the darkness is coming back to him in some way. He's not going to be able to.
It's like his chance of redemption.
Yeah, so we'll speculate real quick about that. Before we do, let's get to some listener feedback.
You're listening to Star Wars After Party. We're honored that you would join us. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube for video and wherever you get your podcasts for audio. If you would like to help the pod grow, consider sharing with the Star Wars fans in your life. In addition, leaving 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, giving the video a like, or leaving a comment on YouTube are extremely helpful. Written reviews are the best way to help the podcast reach new listeners. We appreciate your support. Lastly, we want to hear from you. Record a voice memo on your phone and send it over to starwarsafterparty@gmail.com. Written email works too. Now, back to the after party.
All right, so we've got a few emails from listeners. Again, everyone, please feel free to write in. You can also do a voice memo on your phone. Send that in. We'll give you the the old hologram treatment. It's fun that way. We are an audio format, so it makes sense. But that said, if it's not your thing, we'd rather hear from you at all than not at all. So please feel free to write in. We're getting an email from V, who's become one of my favorite people to hear from. She's always got these really great thoughts. So Cameron, I'm going to read this and we'll chat about it. Star Wars After Party folks. Popping in another email with a note that possibly other people have already mentioned. If not, the episode makes a special moment of showing in the room with Chimere working on his helmet that there is a vein of cortosis running through the walls. By the way, this has kind of now become all over the internet. V was on it like ASAP, immediately.
This was early. I feel like we got this email the night of the episode, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Or maybe the very next day. But yes, she was very quick. In Legends, first, we have Darth Bane, circa 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, whose first novel about his history begins with him working in a cortosis mine. Darth Bane, by the way, y'all, created the rule of 2. Later, in the Darth Plagueis novel, much more relevant here. By the way, Darth Plagueis, Palpatine's master, presumably. The novel begins with Plagueis and his master Tenebris examining a cortosis mine and discussing the similarity to Darth Bane before Darth Plagueis, then an apprentice, caves the mine in on Darth Tenebris' head, killing him and making Plagueis the master. By the way, I'm in the middle of the Darth Plagueis novel. I've been trying to get it done before the end of this show because I got a feeling next week something crazy is going to happen that's going to involve something from that book. We already are seeing the groundwork laid. I got 2 hours left, so I'm almost done. All right, so back to V's email. Now, my personal extrapolation. I'm of two minds. On one hand, I believe that's pronounced Zeiston class ships from the Rise of Skywalker being hand-wavy canon versions of the Eclipse class from Legends, and the way Palpatine comes back in the film being sort of a vague adaptation of that same subject from Dark Empire. This could be just heavy theming and referencing of bits and pieces of the Legends Darth Plagueis story framed around the now end of the High Republic, beginning of the fall of the Jedi moment in time. On the other hand, we know that the child, via Din Grogu, or Mando himself, that the, in quotes, the blank names in canon Star Wars can be placeholders. We know Leslie Headland has said that Episode 8, presumably picking up after another flashback episode, which you were right about, will have something to wow the Legends fans, particularly, paraphrased. Could it be that the names of the stranger and the unknown planet would be reveals in and of themselves. That is to say, if he had straight up said that he was Darth Venomous, Tenebrous' other acolyte, or if the planet was called Baldimnic, the planet it matches from Darth Plagueis with the Cortosis mine, would it give away the ending too early? Anyways, you guys put on a great show as always. It was fun to hear the new co-host in the last episode. Best V. Cameron. It does seem like they are really setting up the fact that this is the same planet from the beginning of the Darth Plagueis novel where he kills Tenebrous. Presumably, best I can tell, for sure, that would have been after the events of this show. Might we see Darth Plagueis, Palpatine's master in Legends? Of course, he gets a mention in episode 3, but it's not explicitly stated there what his species is, whether he's Palpatine's master or just some other master. Presumably, they're not going to change that. Presumably, they're going to keep it. Might we see Darth Tenebrous and Darth Plagueis in this next episode? Could it be that Chimere is either one of them?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. like that may be the name that he takes once he becomes an actual Sith Lord. Yeah. I see that being a more believable outcome than us actually getting it. It sounds so amazing to think about seeing those characters in live action. I think they would go the easier route and just the reveal be that Chimere, at the end of it, assumes the role of the Sith or the one of the two, and takes on the name, or someone dons the name on him of Lord or
Darth,
Plagueis for
I'll save mine for speculation proper. We'll keep moving through it. I mean, I gotta say, for V, man, she's right on. She noticed, as soon as she said that, I was like, let me go back and double check this episode. I did not spot all that, and like I said, I'm still working through the Plagueis novel myself, but it's a great book. It's really interesting, and if they're pulling anything from it, I'm looking forward to it. I noticed.
I did notice that moment in that episode where they really highlighted him looking up, or Osha looking up at that vein of some kind of substance, going up the inside of the cave. I kind of put a pin in it, and then we started talking about the episode, and or you guys, we're talking about the episode. I just kind of forgot about it. But yeah.
So V, you're right on. I do think that we're going to see some tie into that. I do believe that is likely Baldimnic. It looks a lot like Octo. It does seem to be sort of its dark side counterpart. So great. This next email, first time writer in, we got Daniel. Daniel says, my speculation for what happened on Bryndock: Mother Quarrel and other witches took control of the 2 Jedi and had them attack the other 2. They slaughtered the witches to break that control. Daniel, you're right on, man. I mean, it ended up being, of course, just the 1 Jedi that attacked the other 3, but you're right on. I mean, that's exactly what happened. I had speculated that perhaps there was a something darker happening. Maybe there was another third party involved, and Daniel wrote back that it could be that. He went on to say, about the Sith, though, Headland has said the show is like a Russian nesting doll. Mysteries within mysteries. It is definitely that, by the way. He goes on to say, I think it is entirely possible Chimere isn't a real Sith, and he's either having his strings pulled by the actual Sith, or a Sith Lord is going to show up to see who is acting in the Sith's name. As for Chimere looking so young, I don't think there's any canon evidence for it, but my head canon has always been that Palpatine looked old and decrepit with a melty-looking face. He was just using the Force to hide his true appearance until he did not need to anymore. Another thing, when Osha says the Force fades without practice, and Obi-Wan, he had to work to be at full power again, and he was a Jedi Master, so it makes sense that if Osha left as a Padawan, her connection faded. Also, depending on why she left the Order, she could have some unconscious mental blocks in place. Absolutely, I agree with that. Dan goes on to say, let's see here, that it's kind of my thoughts on Sabine. It is possible that she was always Force sensitive, but did not receive the training, so her connection to the Force faded until she started training with Ahsoka and was eventually able to reawaken her connections to the Force. That's my thoughts anyways. Peace, Dan. Dan, great thoughts, man. You were right on with your speculation.
Yeah.
I'm curious with Chimere. There's definitely that line in the last episode where they discuss Chimere looking so, not that he looks so young, but he made the line about I was a Jedi a long time ago. I mean, it could be the Palpatine thing. I've heard that headcanon before. I've never thought of it that way. Again, it's all just sort of conjecture. I will say that in the Plagueis novel, which is not canon, so I'm just throwing that out there, but in the Plagueis novel, they mentioned that Palpatine was like a good-looking, kind of charming character. So I don't think that he was always sort of, decrepit like that, but I do think that the idea of Darksiders who use the dark side over prolonged periods of time eventually begin to look that way. That does seem to be something that happens. So that's kind of the way I've always taken it.
I kind of get where he's coming from on the headcanon thing, because for the longest time I also thought that. Yeah. I thought that Palpatine like projected or made himself look nicer than he actually was. But I think I've come back around to the idea that, and I feel like we talked about this not too long ago. Maybe we were going through Revenge of the Sith and we were talking about that. Yeah. But I think it was him, kind of eating that Force lightning that was being pushed back at him. That kind of like,
yeah, for sure.
Just kind of shriveled him up.
That you could say that was the moment in which he allowed his true self, like. That would tie in with Dan's theory, but I really think it's more of a literal thing. But I could see it either way. If George was like, "Yep, he's right, Dan's right," I'd be like, "Okay, cool, George. Can I borrow $1 billion?" All right, the next email, another first time writer in, Chris Barrett says, "Hey guys, love the pod." Thanks, Chris. Just a thought. I know there were no porgs. We were calling them faux porgs in our house. I know there were no porgs on the unknown planet, but those little skittering creatures in the rocks look like miniature versions of those large walrus-like creatures on Octo in episode 8, The Last Jedi, that Luke milks. Ew. Do you see a similarity? Thank you for all your efforts. Yes, Chris, I do see a similarity. My wife also spotted a very similar similarity on our watch through last night. She's like, "Are those things that Luke Skywalker milked?" No, I don't think so. I think that they got a different name, but yes, it does look similar to me. Cameron, you?
That's a good connection. Yeah, they did look similar.
I think that Cameron wants to find out if he can milk these creatures there on Baldemnik.
I have no interest in blue milk.
I'm going to let you figure that out on your own. Last email comes from Gager. He says, "What's up, party people?" Which, by the way, can we make party people a thing? Like, it does feel like I like party people. I like that a lot. Gager's been trying to make it happen for a while. Audience, it's up to you. It's up to people like V and Chris and Dan. If party people is going to be a thing, I like it personally. I like party people. So yeah, what's up, party people? I missed seeing Cameron's Magnum PI mustache last week, but Kayla did a great job filling in, and I like her takes on the show. I agree. Also, Gager said, "How do I get my wife to watch Star Wars with me?" And I would just say that is not a lesson that the Jedi would teach you, Gager. All right. I also noticed a lot more detail in the 6th episode after watching it a second time through. There were a few things that really stood out to me. One, let's take this point by point there, Cameron. One, I noticed Chimere's lair had veins of cortosis in it, which made me think, could he have had other armor with cortosis besides just his helmet? I think he had an arm piece too, but I could be remembering wrong. What if he has cortosis boots or leg armor too? And what if the entire cave or planet could act as a veil to hide the Sith's existence from the Jedi? And I think it would be cool if we found out somehow that Palpatine may have had access to cortosis as well. Could Palpatine have been wearing cortosis under his senator robes that helped block the Jedi from sensing his power? Possible. Sounds a little tinfoil hatty to me, but I kind of like it. What about you, Cameron?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, do we know enough about it to know that it can cloak someone's strength in the Force?
I don't know. Chimera mentioned that it allows, or it stops from allowing the Jedi to come into
Your
his
senses.
mind. Yeah, so perhaps the Palpatine thing not being recognized by the Jedi and them sensing his darkness was always something that the old EU books talked about a lot, like that you could sort of like close yourself off in the Force or like tuck yourself away. So I'd always kind of just looked at it that way personally. But yeah, could be Gager. I'm not sure. 2.
I like that idea, and it also would explain his arms.
Yeah,
being able to deflect with his arms, because when I watched that scene, it did look like it was his skin, but there was a slight reflectiveness to it. So if there's a way that he's rubbing cortosis on his arms to be able to, that would kind of check out for me. So
in his suit, which is why whenever he was stunned, nothing happened. Could be. So, all right, number 2, the final scene where Osha puts on the helmet was pretty cool. Hearing the Vader-like breathing gave me some chills. I agree. Very cool, Gager. 3, Master Vern. By the way, she hates that nickname. Master Vern is totally connected to Chimera. I've been saying it since episode 2 or 3 that it felt like something was off with her and I didn't trust her. I even speculated to Tyler that I thought she was the Sith's former Jedi Master, but I kept hoping it was Imri Kintaros, but the age wouldn't match the timeline for human character. So while it does look like Vernestra gave Chimera the scar, it is unlikely that Chimera is Kintaros. Although I did see after the episode aired that the spaceship Vernestra and the other Jedi flew into Kofar was called the Kintaros, which I thought was a great Easter egg. It is. But I still think that there's a chance that Imri is Chimera. Because he stated that he was very old and maybe he used Force to extend his youth. Maybe Vern accidentally gave him the scar during a training session. Tinfoil hatty there, Gager. I don't think it's Emery, but I'm gonna let you be right on this if you're right on it. Stand on it. Lastly, I thought the awkward scene where Chimera stripped down and took a swim was very interesting. I bet you did, Gager. He took off black clothing, and when he came out of the water, he put on a clean white shirt. It felt like he wanted to symbolize a baptism in front of Osha, where he was washing away all the evil she saw in him and came out a more righteous person before he continued his attempts to manipulate her. Great insight, Gager. Yeah, that's good. That one, the symbolism escaped me there, but you have opened my eyes, and that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, I think the majority of us were all just kind of in awe of that scene, like, what's going on here?
It was a bit of a strange call for a Star Wars.
You were able to sift. You were able to keep the intrusive, immature thoughts and the ways of your childlike self at bay, and look at it through the eyes of a mature person. Yes. So we appreciate that.
Thank you, Gager. All right, let's do a little bit of last minute final speculation for season 1 of The Acolyte.
You're listening to Star.
That's not right.
Difficult to see. Always in motion is the future. Meditate on this. I will.
It's difficult to see my pad over here. It's just, it's getting harder and harder to see because I'm usually asleep at this time. All right, so last minute speculation. Not much of my speculation has changed since last week because this was all in the past. I mean, ultimately, I think what we're going to see is Master versus Apprentice on this planet. I think that we are going to see Osha versus Soul. I think we are going to see Chimera versus Vernestra. I think she follows them. I think that Mock, or whatever that guy's name was, he's dead. They're all dead. Vernestra dead. Soul dead. Maybe he sacrifices himself, quote unquote. May gets away. I didn't mean to rhyme, but I can do it all day. Then perhaps at this point there is such a raucous energy in the Force that these Sith Lords show up that Chimera is not actually a Sith. Perhaps he is just sort of like, a pretender or something.
A poser.
Or an acolyte himself, and he was trying to get an acolyte so that he can go challenge. I don't know. We don't know his final play. But yeah, that's my speculation. I think that we're going to get some Darth Tenebris or Darth Plagueis action. If it's not that, then we're definitely getting a Darth Revan holocron, which would be sick. I would love to see it. It was rumored that Keanu Reeves was in this show, which is wild. It was often fancasted that he would play Revan. Don't give me Keanu Reeves in this next episode playing Revan in a holocron, because if that happens, then I'm going to, drive to Lucasfilm and riot until I get a Knights of the Old Republic TV show.
Hey, what a tease that would be too.
I'm telling you. And Leslie Headland says she wants to do it, and I'll be honest. It's not that this is my favorite Star Wars of all time, but I will say this: the way that Leslie has been portraying and the way she sees Star Wars, I love it. I really do. So if she wants to jump in and do some Knights of the Old Republic stuff, I'd be down. So Cameron, that's pretty much all my speculation.
I think you did a really good job of running down those points right there at the beginning, because I was still kind of like in my head, like checking off the boxes. I will add that the one thing that I did not think of was the idea that there is such a like surge in the Force because of the potential battles that are going to happen, that it would draw out these Sith Lords to kind of see, which sounds like such a cool way to pull that in and like close things out. I mean, I'm already picturing like Chimera like kind of cowering on his hands and knees, in the presence of an actual great Sith Lord,
Yeah.
I think we are going to see Vernestra fighting. I think we're going to get to see more of that light whip that she uses. I'm trying to think of who I'm anticipating seeing like team up here at the end. I agree with the Osha versus Soul battle, but I don't know if I'm fully convinced that that's going to be the end of that story for the two of them.
Right.
Is to be against each other. I think there will be some sort of redemption to this, or they're going to leave it real dark.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are that Soul is going to essentially sacrifice himself and almost in like a Obi-Wan did to Vader in Episode 4 type way, where he just kind of lets her take him down. We'll see. I do want to mention, this is not speculation, but before we go, as I was listening to the Darth Plagueis book this week, there was a moment where Plagueis was reflecting on Sith powers, and Darth Tenebris told him that there were some Sith who were actually able to fly, and that it had to do more with raw talent and ability on whether you could do that or not. And so I said all that to say, we saw a Sith fly. Darth Tenebris knew that it was something that could be done. Darth Plagueis knew that he couldn't do it. So I just thought that was interesting. There's no doubt in my mind that Leslie Headland was like, all right. She's like, pushed her glasses up real nerdy like, and just like read Darth Plagueis and then wrote this show. Like, it's so cool. I'm really glad that she's bringing in the Star Wars that she really likes. Because, I mean, I've got some Legends ideas that I really like, and if I was to write a Star Wars, you best believe I would be bringing some of them with me. So I just love it when that happens. It's real cool, man.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Any more last-minute thoughts or bits of speculation? Next week, that's it.
No, man. I think that's all. I think we milked it as far as this episode goes.
All right, let's land this ship. Well, there we go. Again, my fingers are missing a little bit. All right, it's getting a little late. Look, we got one more episode of The Acolyte. If you've been listening to us this entire season, we're grateful that you're here. We're glad that you've been along for the journey. Stick around. When The Acolyte ends, we're not going to be done talking about it. And when we get done talking about it, we're not going to be done talking about Star Wars. So make sure you're subscribed and you're hanging around. Karen, are you looking forward to this final episode of The Acolyte? And by the way, our 50th episode. Congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah, when you brought in the episode and said episode 49, I was like, holy cow, we've already done 49 of these. And I hope the day never comes that I stop talking about Star Wars. But no, I'm just excited for next week.
I don't think it will. And until then, Tyler out.
Cameron out.
This party's over.